Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Gail Lewis podcast with me, your host, Gail Lewis. It is my absolute pleasure to be with you this evening to share another episode of the Gail Lewis podcast with you. Tonight, we have someone who I know that you will love, someone you might have seen before, and someone whose story is compelling. I love to have people on this show who can not only entertain us and make us proud of who we are as a people and excited about our community, but also people who, if young people somehow watch, I don't think that we're their demographic, but will be shining stars to young people who maybe want to in this situation. I'm talking about someone who is an actor who goes out and you've seen him in commercials, you've seen him on stage. He's successful in his own right in so many ways, but especially so as a human being and, of course, as an actor. And he's someone I'm excited to welcome to the podcast stage. Put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Greg Mays. Woo!
Gail Lewis, how are you?
I am well, Mr. Greg Mays. It is great to have you on and talk about you and all things acting. Are you ready?
All things acting. Let's do it.
Okay. So my first question is a little out of left field. You have an MBA, correct?
I do, but very few people who know me as the actor Greg Mays know that. So you just outed me.
I just totally put that right out on Front Street. I know. Okay, but I put that out there because I always like to kind of like use this as a lesson to young people. As you know, I'm an educator and I see students a lot of times. I'm not really sure what I should do. Maybe I should just be an accountant. And I love accountants. CPAs are my jam. But maybe they're choosing that because they don't know they can be other things or that they could be successful in other things. And that's why I find your story, well, I find a lot of things about your story compelling, but that's one of them especially. Because
fun fact.
Uh-huh.
I am in a past life a certified public accountant.
Oh my goodness gracious. Did I hear another round of applause? Amazing. So I never want students to think that they can only do one thing, because there it is. There's that resounding round of applause, because you can be multiple things. You can do
Absolutely.
multiple things. You can have multiple lives, even though reincarnation may or may not be a thing. I'm not sure. But
Right.
whilst on this earth, you can have multiple lives. You can do multiple things, and you can follow your passion or passions.
Yes.
If that is what they are. And so Greg Mays has a master's degree in business. However, he also has the acting bug. And that's what we're talking about tonight. So Greg, how did you get started in acting? Was it something that you always were interested in? Or was it one day you saw something and said, hey, that looks like fun?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the greatest gifts that my now deceased father gave to us as a family was this membership in the Negro Ensemble Company. So that is the theater that I grew up on. And it was awesome because it was intimate theater in houses that were no more than 100 seats, sometimes with 50 seats. And this is the theater I grew up on. So I tell people, I saw Denzel Washington on the stage when he was like 20 years old in the original Soldier's Story. No, I'm sorry, it was a Soldier's Play before it became the movie A Soldier's Story. And also in that cast were people like, I'm not sure if Sam Jackson was in that particular just sort of effort, but I did see him on the stage early. People like Giancarlo Esposito, people like Madge Sinclair, who was a brilliant, brilliant actress. Adolph Caesar was a brilliant, brilliant actor. So this is the theater that I grew up on. And fun fact, I tend to study the things that I like because it heightens my appreciation for them. So this is how I actually started to act. I lived in LA for 3.5 years. I had actor friends. One of my dear friends was the actor Hill Harper.
Oh,
Hill and I hung hard when we were in LA, and that was at the beginning of his career. And I remember his first big break was on Family Matters, of all
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And when he was on that show, we had a Family Matters Hill Harper watch party where all his friends got together to watch him on this episode. And I think he played football on the show, blah, blah, blah. But a brilliant guy. Went to Brown undergrad, went to Harvard Law School, and the Kennedy School of Government.
Wow. Triple
Yeah,
threat.
yeah, just crazy. So anyway, even when I was in LA, I had these actor friends. A friend of mine was Damon Wayans' assistant, but I had absolutely no interest in acting at that point. I worked in film distribution, blah, blah, blah. But then when I got back here to New York, well, no, actually, when I was in California, I took my first acting class was at Stanford University, and it was in their
Great place
evening.
to start.
Great place to start. I was living in Palo Alto at the time, literally down the block, from Stanford, and in their extension or evening division, they had this acting class, and I'll never forget. The teacher's name was Winter Mead, which was just such an awesome.
Winter,
Winter Mead, Meade, and
like the drink.
and I did a scene from Waiting for Godot, or Godot, as some people call it, but I just call it Waiting for Godot. And I did it with this New York Jewish accent. Why? Because I'm from New York, and the character felt like an older Jewish man to me. So I pulled out my New York Jewish accent and did this. And I think the teacher was like, "What?" So anyway, that was the first class I took when I got back to New York. I took a couple more classes, and in each of these classes, more often than not, there was a showcase at the end, which meant that I was going to exit stage right before the showcase, because I was like, "What? That's not going to happen. I'm terrified."
And for our non-actors, what's a showcase?
I'm sorry, showcase. If you take a class, 9 times out of 10 at the end of that class, you'll perform for family and friends. If you go to Juilliard or NYU, they have showcases at the end of your tenure there. And in those showcases, agents and managers come and they go, "Oh, that Gail Lewis, she's a brilliant actress. We're going to sign her now."
Today.
Yes. So I avoided showcases at all costs because I was terrified, particularly of the stage. So I take these classes every now and then. And my niece knew that I took classes every now and then. At the time, she was working for a talent manager, a woman by the name of Marianne Raposo. And I guess these breakdown or audition notices came in, and they would notice came in, and they're looking for a middle-aged Black man. And so again, my niece knew I took the course. She called me up and said, "Uncle Greg, do you want to audition for the show?" And being a somewhat adventurous person, I said, "Why not?"
Ah,
I didn't have a headshot, didn't have anything. And I went on this audition and I got a call back.
and so for people who don't know, callback is when you get called back for a second round of interviews.
Yes. So this happened a couple of times, and the woman my niece was working for, Marianne, picked up the phone and said, "Look, I'm not really sure what you're doing, but you're doing something because you keep getting these callbacks. Would you like me to represent you?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. Sure, represent me." So that's how I started my formal, just sort of, acting persona, if you will. And that woman still represents me to this day, 12, 13 years later. It started out very slow with one audition, maybe every 3 months. And then it built before the pandemic to 3 auditions a week. And then the pandemic happened, everything shifted to self-tapes. And then I was forced to join the union, the SAG-AFTRA. And I was forced to join.
And yeah, why, for people who don't know, why would you be forced to join the union?
Yes,
Because you were working so much?
Well, I wish you could do, okay, there are union jobs and there are non-union jobs. And after you do 3 union jobs, before you do the 4th one, you have to join a union. You become a SAG-AFTRA must join. So you can't do that next union job unless you're a member of the union. So I was about to shoot this Gillette commercial on like Wednesday, and my manager called me up on Tuesday and said, "You can't shoot that commercial tomorrow unless you join the union today." And fortunately, they had payment plans for the union. It cost about $3,000 to join. So I got on the quick payment plan, joined the union, and was able to shoot that commercial the next day. And so I was in the union for several years. And in maybe January of this year or February or so, I not resigned from the union, but I changed my union status from being a full member to a category that they call FICOR, which the union doesn't really like because you are a member in financial status, if you will, only. So you still pay your dues. They're based on the union commercials that you get, but you can work union and non-union jobs. So if you're in the union, you are not supposed to work non-union jobs. So the challenge in this day and age, in that there's so much more non-union work than there is union work. So
and why is that for people who are unfamiliar with the way these things go?
Yeah. So I'm going to put my business school hat on for a second. Way back in the beginning of time, when I was a youngster, everybody watched three channels: channels 2, channel 4, and channel 7. That was CBS, NBC, and ABC. The whole world watched those three channels.
And also, along with that, the means of production were very closely held. So
absolutely,
it was hard to create things. It cost a lot of money. The distribution was very tight. So then one day the iPhone was invented. And
yes, the iPhone and Zoom and StreamYard, the platform that we're on now, which looks fantastically professional. And there's, so to your point, all of a sudden the barriers to entry were lowered drastically or dramatically. And then that combined with the proliferation of streaming channels. So all of a sudden you went from 3 channels to what, on the cable, there's like 750 channels, and they all can't show the same old library. So all these people, many people started to create all these their own shows. Netflix has its original series. HBO, the first one, they had their original series. Disney Plus, Hulu, all these folks. So the interesting thing was that people were no longer watching 3 show networks. Now we're watching at least 10, 15, just sort of networks. So long story short, ad dollars were once focused on 3 channels. And then, so you could pay people $1 million an episode, actors, to be on Friends. But once
and they could all hold out for $1 million each until everybody got the same pay. Because there was only 3 channels to watch.
There was 3 channels. And it was like, well, if you don't give me this $1 million that you're giving this person over here, then I'm walking and I'm going to destroy your show. But really, the ad dollars just fragmented from 3 channels to 20 channels or whatever. And so financially, these individual shows could no longer support, these incredible, actor fees. And then, but, in the meantime, SAG-AFTRA had these rules, these residual rules and all the rest of that. But really, the industry can't pay everybody SAG wages because there's not enough ad dollars, because it's all fragmented into these little pieces. Now, no one's going to say that. The unions are not going to say that, blah, 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 because they're still, trying their best to get everybody to pay SAG wages and work under SAG, rules, but it ain't going to happen. So fast forward to, I'm in the union. I go from 3 self-tapes a week to 1 self-tape every 3 months, again, because there's so few relative to non-union jobs. union jobs. And I was like, okay, I was talking to a young friend of mine. I said, look, I'm thinking about going FICOR. And he was like, what? You're going to go FICOR? That doesn't make any sense. I said, man, you are 20 years old. Okay. You got 40 years to build a career
Of doing this.
this. All right. I could be dead, tomorrow, the way my body is feeling. So, I'm going to let you stay in SAG. I'm going to go FICOR, which will allow me to do SAG, union and non-union work. And I'm going to keep it moving. And it was tough for me to just sort of do that, because you kind of believe, oh, blah, 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 blah. Best move I've ever made, because now I'm back up to 3 self-tapes a week, and auditioning, mostly commercials and stuff.
What was the first commercial you ever did?
Oh, the first commercial.
On like broadcast television.
Yes, was it was for a Connecticut healthcare company. And I played a doctor. And I had my doctor jacket on, and I had my lab coat on. I had a stethoscope around my neck, and I had a pad that I was taking notes in. So that was the very, very first one. And it was crazy, and you got to kind of get used to being on sets. They can be very intimidating. And that one was, even if I only had like 1 or 2 lines, it can just get very scary. And then, I think the scariest I've been on, I played a judge for this episode of a series called A Good Cop. And it was, I don't even know. I want to say it was like for this Korean or Japanese just sort of production company. And it was a big production. It was in this beautiful courthouse downtown. And there had to be like 50 people in this room. And I had like multiple lines, like a little monologue. And it was like, oh my God, Greg, you can destroy this whole production by, messing up your lines. And, and then of course it's TV. So, you have to say the same lines 5 different times from 5 different angles and blah, blah, blah. And, it was getting close to lunch and I was hungry and, so anyway, that was the scariest just sort of set I was on, particularly at that time and stuff. So yeah, that's how it just kind of started.
And it's just burgeoned from there. I see you on TV all the time. You have one of those faces where you could be in a beer commercial, you could be in any and every pharmacy commercial, pharmaceuticals. I've seen you in those, everything. It's just, there was a New York One commercial where we were on the train.
Yes. I wish I even had more of an everyman kind of face, because then maybe I'd get some recurring role on some television show, because that's what I really need. So yeah, it's good, Gail, but I don't want anybody to think that this is an easy endeavor, because there is a tremendous amount of hustle involved, before self-tapes, which is the auditions that you do from your home in front of your gray backdrop with your lights and the rest of that stuff. You literally had to go to these auditions and, for a Queen
person, all over town.
That meant
you have to geographically live in a place where, like a New York or an LA.
Yes. And living in Queens, an hour and a half out of Manhattan was not necessarily convenient. You'd spend an hour and a half getting into this audition, and then you'd be there for anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. And then you turn around, do an hour and a half back out to Queens. And it was painful, but thank God for the self-tapes, because now the first auditions, 99% of them you do in the comfort of your home. And even the callbacks, I had a callback earlier today. And, for the callbacks, usually the director's on the line as well as the casting people. And sometimes there are 4 or 5. The client can be on the line as well. So yeah, it's a tremendous hustle. And one of the beautiful things, I attribute a fair amount of my success to being available to do these auditions. As you know, I run at least 1, 2, maybe 3 nonprofits, but I work from home. So as my own boss, I can move my whole schedule around to accommodate auditions and all that.
Callback or an audition or
That's right.
Or,
Whereas
and this is something else
people,
I wanted to ask you about.
yes,
Two things I did want to ask you about. First, you said that it helps you with your schedule so that you can do other things. And one of the things that I do like about you, and I want you to tell us why, you did kind of hint toward it a little bit earlier, but I know that even though you've been in a myriad of commercials, you've been on stage 100 times with different productions, both musical and non-musical. Um, but something I know about you, and I want you to speak to it, you are always taking classes. Tell me
yes,
about that.
yes.
Why, and why is it important?
Yeah, like most things, you can take a crash course on something, and a crash course in acting is if you go to drama school, and if you go to NYU undergrad or grad, if you go to Juilliard, they only have grad acting there. If you go to Yale, if you go to UC San Diego, if
Gail.
you go to Rutgers, those are folks who are spending 2 to 4 years just doing acting 24/7. And then they get out. They are just, chock full of talent. They've got this energy. And most importantly, they've got a manager and agent who pushes them right into, Shakespeare in the Park, in a B or C role. And then, there are folks like me who just have to kind of, piecemeal, their MFA. So, you start out taking a course here, a course there, and at least I did. And then you realize that this little course here, course there is not really teaching you about acting. They're mostly kind of scene study classes, but you
Mhm.
never really have learned how to act. And there are a
Right.
couple of different approaches and stuff. So I took this one course at the Stella Adler Studio of Acting. It was an acting for film and television class. And it was fantastic. And I took it like maybe 5 years into my little acting career. And I asked the guy at the end, I said, well, what would you suggest that I do next? And he said, well, that depends. I said, well, it depends on what, whether you want to be a serious actor or something else. I said, well, look, of course I'm trying to be a serious actor. I'm not, it's like not some bozo kind of thing. And he said, well, based on what I've seen, you might enjoy the Meisner approach to acting. Um, and he pointed me to two studios, the Terry Knickerbocker studio, which is in Brooklyn, and the Maggie Flanagan studio, which is in Manhattan. And as it would happen, I actually went to the Maggie Flanagan studio and studied Meisner for 2 years under Charlie Sandlin, who's the master teacher there. And he went to Rutgers with Alberto, the brother, Alberto Bonilla, who's teaching this film and television class. So they had both gone to Rutgers. They both knew each other at the same time, and they studied under Maggie Flanagan, who studied under Sanford Meisner, the creator of this particular approach. So yes, so I did this. It was difficult for me to call myself an actor because I had just taken these little courses, and I knew friends who were phenomenal actors who had phenomenal training. So I said, okay, I got to get my training. I can't just be out here, blowing in the wind, thinking acting is memorizing lines and spewing those lines, when someone says action. So I started off with my Meisner training, and then I went over to London to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts for one summer.
As one does.
As one does, you know what I'm saying? Cynthia Erivo's, alma mater. And I took a Shakespeare course there, which was fantastic. It was 5 weeks. It included monologues, sonnets, scenes, period dance, sword fighting, all this stuff, period music. It was awesome. And then, far too many people were asking me to sing in plays. And, I'm one of those, I'm a chorus singer, not necessarily a solo singer. And, but people asked me to do solos. I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. So I started to take some singing, some voice lessons. And then I did this musical theater intensive down at the Stella Adler Studio of Acting. And I think they were feeling very charitable that year. And all they needed some old black faces to mix it up. So I did that, and it was amazing, Um, and then most recently, about a week and a half ago, I finished up this Anton Chekhov intensive again at Stella Adler, and that was 5 weeks, 30 hours a week.
Wow.
Me,
Intensive.
yes, and 14, other actors. a couple of whom I was old enough to be their grandfather. So these 18-year-olds, like, what? But it was awesome because I haven't played that much in quite some time. And I got to play two great roles. I got to play Uncle Vanya from Uncle Vanya, and I got to play, oh God, what's his name? Lekaipen. Yeah, whatever. From
The
the
other guy.
exactly. Lepakin. Yes, Lepakin, I believe so. So it was just awesome. We were just encouraged to lose our minds. And that's something that I do relatively easily. So yeah, yeah. But yes, you're right.
That's a
I'm
blessing.
always studying because like any other profession, the more you do, the better, it's a craft. The more you do, and then the more you study because there's just so much to learn, in the field, if you will. So
It's
yes.
easy to study, like you said earlier, when it's something that you enjoy, something that you love. It
It is.
really does make the studying part of it, the
Yep.
learning part of it, that much easier. But
Yep.
before I let you go, I would like to ask you, to all of the young wannabe actors out there, especially the actors of color, what is your advice?
Get training. You know, I spent the first, 4 years of my acting career without much training. And it just, it was fun, but it was scary. um, and even with the training, it's scary. But it just, when you train, it's just so much easier, to act, um, to, behave authentically under imaginary circumstances, because that's one of the things that actors do. And the more you just sort of practice that, I had this audition early this week, um, and I was playing the manager of a toy store. And, they were like, okay, just improvise some stuff. And, here I am, just like this, I'm on Zoom. And I'm the manager of the toy store talking about, hey, Mrs. Johnson, it's so great to see you. I got that slinky that you ordered. Hey, Bob, it's so great. You're just amazing. How's your wife doing? You just.
Did you get the part?
I don't know, but
Okay.
but at the end, the woman she said, well, I really want to be a patron at your toy store, and the thing with auditions, and I learned this, the hard way, is that you have to drop in immediately, as
Right,
in drop into this character.
right.
There are very few do-overs. They might give you a little note, and you might get a chance to do something that they were looking more for, but you've got to drop in immediately. And I've been on auditions where I didn't do that, and it was like, okay, well, yeah, we'll see you next time. So that's one of the other things that the training just sort of allows you to do. So yeah, train, and just from the outset, get some training and continue to train.
So get some training. If you are a wannabe actor, if you're an actor and you want to get better, train, train, train. Thanks
Yes.
so much, Greg Mays, for joining us tonight on the Gail Lewis podcast. If you'd like some more information about Greg, you can always check him out at sirgregofmays.com.
Right.
Sirgregofmays.com.
Well, go to Instagram. Well, I'm there at Sir Greg of Mays as well.
I love it. We're going to look forward to seeing you real soon on another commercial, on the stage, on this big screen. But wherever it is that we are going to check you out, we look forward to checking you out. So thanks again for guest Gail Lewis podcast. I am Gail Lewis, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me with Greg Mays, the actor, this evening. Everyone, please go out and have a great night and join me here next time on the Gail Lewis podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Sayonara.